The cold emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions. Nothing moved. No stars blinked. No planets spun in orbit. No sound broke the silence. In the void, the enormous shape of the Erebus, an advanced human spacecraft, floated in complete stillness. For millennia, it had drifted without purpose, carrying a crew who had been asleep for far longer than any living being should be allowed to rest. On board, deep in the bowels of the ship, a faint hum echoed from dormant systems that had long been silent. A red light flickered faintly in the distance, illuminating a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The ship had been in this state for hundreds of thousands of years, its systems still functioning but its crew trapped in cryo-sleep, waiting for the day they would wake. Suddenly, the calm was shattered by a loud, shrill alarm that reverberated through every inch of the ship. A series of mechanical whirs followed by the distant clattering of metal. The noise seemed to bring the ship's lifeless corridors to life, filling them with an eerie sense of urgency. In a dimly lit chamber within the heart of the ship, the cryopods slowly began to activate. The cooling systems that had kept the crew in frozen sleep for so long began to retract. One by one, the bodies inside these pods slowly shifted, releasing their hold on a world they had not seen for centuries. Captain Eric Kane's eyes snapped open. His vision blurred as his senses slowly returned to him, like waking from a dream. His lungs ached as he struggled to breathe, as though his body had forgotten how to live. He felt an intense stiffness in his limbs, his muscles unaccustomed to the movement they had been denied for so long. His throat was dry, the taste of frozen sleet still lingering. Confusion clouded his thoughts as he sat up in his pod. His hands trembled slightly, and he grabbed at the sides of the pod for support. He looked around the sterile, metallic room, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. What had happened? Why had they been asleep for so long? As his eyes focused on the small display beside him, the ship's AI system, Zara, activated. Her cold, emotionless voice echoed in the room. "Captain Eric Kane, you are the last surviving member of the human race. Earth is gone. Humanity's last hope lies in your survival." Kane's heart skipped a beat. Earth was gone. His mind couldn't process the magnitude of the statement. The images of Earth, the cities, the life, the people, had it all been destroyed? And if so, how? He felt a sickening sense of dread settling in his stomach. How had Earth been destroyed? What happened? The questions filled his mind, but no answers came. The voice of Zara gave him no details, offering only the stark truth of the situation. Zara continued, her voice now accompanied by a stream of images flashing across the screen, though none were clear. "You have been in cryo-sleep for 800,000 years, Captain. The Earth's destruction occurred long ago. A cataclysmic event wiped out all human life, and only a few fragments of humanity survived by escaping into space. Your cryopod was activated as part of a last-ditch effort to preserve humanity." Kane's head spun with this revelation. His memories began to return, images of a world he had once known. The bright sky over a bustling city, the laughter of children, the feeling of the sun on his face. How could it all be gone? He staggered to his feet, trying to steady himself as his body slowly adjusted to the reality of being awake again. The ship was eerily silent now, except for the distant hum of machinery. It felt empty. There were no other signs of life, no other awakened crew members. Was he truly the only one left? His breath caught in his chest, and he leaned against the cold wall of the chamber, his mind reeling. What happened? His hand reached up instinctively to touch his head, as though the act might somehow pull the answers out of his own mind. But there were no answers, only questions. As the ship's systems activated around him, Zora's voice broke through the quiet once again. "Captain, you need to gather your strength. There is a new mission awaiting you." Kane's head snapped toward the voice. New mission? What mission could possibly await him? Was there anyone left to help? Was there even anyone to fight for? Zara, seemingly unfazed by the emotional turmoil, Kane was experiencing continued with calm precision. "A signal has been detected, Captain. It originates from a distant galaxy. The signal is human." A cold shiver ran down Kane's spine. Human. How could that be possible? If Earth had been destroyed, if humanity had been wiped from the face of the universe, who could be sending this signal? The words echoed in his mind as he processed the message. A human signal. From the far reaches of space. It was as if a thread of hope had suddenly appeared in the darkest corner of the universe. "Why didn't I hear this sooner?" Kane asked, his voice strained as he tried to regain some of his composure. Zura responded. Her tone clipped. "The signal was not detectable until now. It was weak, but it has grown in strength. It is coming from a location that will require your ship to travel through hostile space. You must prepare for the journey, Captain." The mention of a hostile space sent another wave of dread through Kane. What kind of enemies were out there, beyond the galaxy they had once called home? He swallowed hard and tried to focus. There were no answers coming from the past. Everything he had known was gone. But this signal, could hold the key to everything. To the survival of humanity, to understanding what had happened to Earth. But most of all, it could be the key to discovering if anyone else had survived. Kane took one long, steadying breath. His training had kicked in. He would follow the mission. He would find this signal and uncover the truth, no matter what it took. But just as Kane turned to make his way to the ship's command center, a sudden burst of static filled the air. The lights flickered overhead, and for a moment, Kane felt his heart race. Was it the void? Were they already here? He froze. The air was thick with tension. Kane turned toward the console, hands trembling slightly as he reached out to activate it. The display blinked, showing the same coordinates for the signal, but there was more. An image, distorted but unmistakable. A face. A human face. Before Kane could make sense of it, the display flickered and went black, leaving only a low hum in its wake. A deep silence hung in the air again, as if the ship had fallen into a void. His pulse quickened. The signal had come from somewhere far beyond what he had ever expected. But what did it mean? Was this a trap? Was the person really human, or had something worse been waiting all along? He stepped away from the console, his mind filled with uncertainty. The only thing he knew for sure was this: the journey ahead would be nothing like he had expected. And whatever the truth was, it was closer than ever to being uncovered. And so, with a final breath, Captain Eric Kane set off toward the unknown, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Cliffhanger. The distant sound of a growing hum echoed in the hallways, barely audible at first. The ship began to vibrate gently, as though something, or someone, was making its presence known. Something, or someone was waiting. But while Captain Eric Kane stood at the helm of the Erebus, his heart pounding in his chest as the ship's engines roared to life. The ship had come to a halt in the darkness of space, and now it was time to awaken the crew. His mind was still reeling from the staggering news of Earth's destruction and the cryptic message about a human survivor out there, somewhere in the vastness of space. With steady hands, he moved towards the cryo chamber. The glass tanks that held the crew members were now slowly releasing their frozen hold. One by one, the bodies that had been asleep for 800,000 years began to stir. The first to wake was Lieutenant Bonner. His body trembled as the cryopod released him from his long, cold sleep. He gasped for breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his body weak from the centuries of dormancy. He blinked rapidly, disoriented, trying to make sense of his surroundings. His eyes widened in confusion, searching the room. Where are we?" Lieutenant Bonner asked, his voice hoarse. He looked at Kane, still unable to comprehend what was happening. "It's okay, Bonner," Kane reassured him. "We're alive. Earth is gone. But there's a mission. We have to gather the crew." The next few hours were a blur as Kane and Bonner moved from pod to pod, reviving each of the crew members. The others awoke, some more easily than others, their memories foggy and their senses dulled. Many couldn't remember what had happened, let alone understand how the years had passed. But one by one, they stood up, disoriented but alive. It wasn't until the last pod opened that the crew finally had their full complement. Dr. Lyra Voss, the brilliant scientist and the ship's lead research officer, was the last to awaken. As the pod's lid opened, she gasped, her body stiff and aching, as though she were emerging from a long-forgotten dream. She blinked, looking around the room as if trying to make sense of everything. "What's going on? Where's Earth?" Dr. Voss's voice trembled with both fear and confusion. "Earth is gone," Kane answered solemnly, his voice tinged with grief. "We're the last of humanity." Dr. Voss's eyes widened as she took in the star maps that were projected in the air around her. The ship's computer system had already begun to update the maps based on their current location in space. She began to analyze the data, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. "This isn't right," she muttered to herself. "This doesn't make sense. The maps are showing that we're far away from Earth's coordinates. Entire star systems, they're gone. This galaxy has changed completely in our absence." Kane stood next to her, watching as the scientist ran through the data. He, too, was starting to grasp the enormity of their situation. The galaxy, the universe they had once known, was no longer the same. It was a strange and an unfamiliar place. Suddenly, a voice interrupted their thoughts. "Captain Kane, Dr. Voss, I have an update." Came Zora's calm, emotionless voice. "The signal you detected, it is indeed a message from a human survivor. However, the coordinates it's coming from are within hostile territory. The location is near the edge of the galaxy, where the Void Dominators have established their stronghold." The words hit Kane like a cold slap to the face. The Void Dominators, an empire of ruthless aliens, known throughout the galaxy for their destruction of entire civilizations. They had already eradicated humanity, and now they were hunting down any remnants of human life. The news made everything more real, more dangerous. "What are we going to do?" Dr. Voss asked, her voice shaky as she turned to face Kane. "We can't be the only humans left. We need to find this survivor." "We will," Kane said, determination burning in his eyes. "But we need to be careful. The Void Dominators are not to be underestimated." The crew gathered in the ship's command center, preparing for their journey to the coordinates of the human signal. Kane stared at the star map, the images of destroyed planets and dark voids filling his thoughts. He knew they were heading into enemy territory, but there was no turning back now. They had to follow the signal and find the last trace of humanity. As the Erebus set course for the unknown, the tension in the ship grew. The crew members knew the danger they were about to face, but they also knew that their mission was the only chance they had for survival. Every step they took into hostile space brought them closer to the truth, and closer to the people who had destroyed everything they had once known. Hours passed, and the crew prepared themselves for what lay ahead. The air was thick with anticipation. Every corridor they passed through seemed darker than the last, as though the ship itself was growing nervous about the dangerous path they were traveling. The ship hummed with power as it propelled forward, leaving the dead void of space behind and entering the vast unknown. Then, as they approached the source of the signal, something unexpected happened. A massive ship appeared on the horizon, a sleek alien craft, far larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. The Erebus was dwarfed in comparison. It was a warship, and it was headed directly toward them. "Captain," Dr. Voss shouted, her voice filled with alarm. "That ship is not human. It's an alien warship." Kane's heart raced as he scanned the ship's design. The alien vessel was a terrifying sight. Its dark metal surface was covered in strange, glowing markings, and its engines emitted a faint hum that sent chills down Kane's spine. "It's too advanced," Bonner said quietly. "We're no match for that ship. What are they doing here?" Kane's eyes narrowed. "We don't know, but we need to get answers." The alien ship drew closer, and the crew of the Erebus braced for a confrontation. Just as they were preparing for the worst, a transmission crackled through their comm system. The alien ship's captain spoke in a language that Kane couldn't understand, but Zara quickly translated it for him. "Human, you are entering dangerous territory," the voice said, its tone calm but filled with a warning. "Turn back now, and we will spare your lives." The transmission cut off abruptly. Kane stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The ship was clearly an advanced alien race, but who were they? And why had they warned them? Zara's voice interrupted his thoughts. "This ship belongs to the Vern, an ancient race known to be allies of humanity. However, their intentions are unclear. They have always been cautious, but they now seem distrustful." A sense of unease crept over Kane. Allies or not, the Vern were not giving them the warm welcome he had hoped for. Something was off. "Why are they hiding something?" Dr. Voss asked, her brow furrowing. "What aren't they telling us?" Kane turned to her, his expression grim. "We'll find out soon enough. We're going to meet them face to face." The tension on the ship grew as the Erebus drew closer to the Vern warship. The crew had no choice but to prepare for the worst. The mystery of the Vern's true intentions hung over them, and the promise of discovering the last human survivor seemed farther away with each passing moment. And as the two ships came within striking distance, Kane knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of their fight for survival. The galaxy had changed, and humanity's future now hung in the balance. As the Erebus made its way through the cold void of space, the tension among the crew grew palpable. The encrypted message they had received earlier was the first clue to what might have been the last hope for humanity. The message came from a hidden human colony, survivors who had escaped Earth's destruction in secret ships. Kane stared at the holographic display showing the coordinates. He had never thought there could be hope, let alone the possibility that humanity had somehow survived. He felt the weight of his role as captain, the burden of being one of the last of his kind, and the responsibility for those who still lived. As the crew prepared for their journey to the colony, the promise of uncovering the truth hung heavy in the air. The Erebus sped toward the coordinates. The galaxy was still an unfamiliar place, and every passing moment felt like a leap into the unknown. As the ship traveled deeper into space, something began to go wrong. The ship's sensors started malfunctioning. The navigation systems flickered, the power levels surged, and an eerie silence swept through the ship. "What's going on?" Dr. Voss asked, her voice tense. Zara, the AI system, responded coolly. "There seems to be an interference in the systems. Unknown forces are scrambling our communications." Kane cursed under his breath. This was not good. They were heading toward the unknown, and now their technology was failing them. It felt like the galaxy itself was fighting against them. Just then, a warning signal blared. The crew scrambled to their stations as a bright flash appeared on the radar. Alien ships, massive, angular craft, emerged from the darkness. They had been ambushed. The first battle with the unknown forces was chaotic. Kane barked orders as the crew fought to defend the ship. Aliens, strange and terrifying, descended upon the Erebus, their ships blurring across the radar. The ship's weapon systems engaged, blasting through the blackness of space, but the enemy was too swift, too numerous. In the midst of the chaos, Kane's mind raced. This wasn't just a random ambush. Someone had to have known they were coming. But who? Who had the power to manipulate the galaxy to this extent? The Erebus shook as enemy fire slammed into its hull. The crew was under intense pressure. The sounds of weapons fire and alarms filled the corridors, creating a war zone inside the ship. Kane's hands gripped the controls tightly, trying to steer the Erebus away from the alien fire. They needed to get out of this alive. Bonar and the rest of the crew fought valiantly, manning the turrets and defending their home. Dr. Voss worked feverishly to repair the damaged systems, her focus unbroken by the battle surrounding them. The intensity of the combat pushed the crew to their limits, but they refused to give up. Kane watched as one by one, the alien ships were destroyed. But just as the battle seemed to be turning in their favor, a massive force appeared. A fleet of Void Dominator ships emerged from the blackness, their dark silhouettes blotting out the stars. Kane's stomach sank. The Void Dominators. These were the real threat. "These are no ordinary enemies," Kane muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to get to that colony and fast." As the battle raged on, the Erebus managed to break free from the clutches of the Void Dominators and continue its journey toward the human colony. But the fight had taken its toll. The ship was damaged, the crew exhausted, but they pressed on, driven by the hope of finding answers. The colony was located on a barren moon, nestled in the shadow of a dying star. As the Erebus descended toward the surface, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The colony was supposed to be a safe haven, a sanctuary for humanity. But when they landed, what they found was far from a welcoming sight. The colony was abandoned. Buildings, once bustling with life, were now empty and decaying. There was no sign of the survivors, no traces of human life. Kane's heart sank as he walked through the abandoned streets, his boots echoing in the silence. It was as if the people had simply vanished. "This isn't right," Dr. Voss said quietly, her voice thick with disbelief. "There should be people here. There should be signs of life." Kane's eyes scanned the empty structures. The walls were covered in strange symbols, markings he didn't recognize. They were alien, yet they seemed to be written by human hands, as if the survivors had been trying to communicate something. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the very planet was holding its breath. Then, Kane's eyes fell on something that sent a chill through him. A small datapad, half buried in the sand. He picked it up, his fingers trembling as he activated it. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of messages. They were fragmented, but the message was clear. "We've made a deal with the Void Dominators. They promise us protection in exchange for humanity's future." Kane's heart stopped. The survivors, the ones who had escaped Earth's destruction, had made a deal with the Void Dominators. The very enemies that had wiped out humanity. They had sold their souls to the devil. "Why?" Kane whispered. "Why would they betray their own kind?" Dr. Voss stepped forward, her face grim. "There's something bigger going on here. This colony, it was never meant to be a safe haven. It was a trap." Just then, a voice crackled through the comm system. Zara, the ship's AI, spoke in a calm but urgent tone. "Captain, the Void Dominators are approaching. They've detected your presence. You need to leave now." Kane's mind raced. The Void Dominators had found them. There was no time to process everything that had happened. He knew they had to leave, but there was one thing that still gnawed at him: the truth. Why had the survivors chosen this path? What had they been promised? Before he could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and a massive ship descended from the sky. It was the Void Dominators, and they were here for them. The final battle was upon them, and this time there would be no escape. Kane's eyes narrowed as he prepared for what was to come. The crew gathered around him, their weapons ready. The fate of humanity lay in their hands, and the truth they had uncovered only made the stakes higher. "This is it," Kane said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. "We fight. We fight for the future of humanity." And with that, the Erebus and its crew faced the impending battle, knowing that the answers they had uncovered were just the beginning of a war that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The first sign of the Void Dominator's presence was the rumble that shook the barren surface of the moon. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the Erebus crew as massive shadows appeared in the sky. The Void Dominators had arrived. Kane's heart pounded in his chest as he looked out over the colony. What had once been a hopeful sanctuary now felt like a death trap. The enemy fleet descended from the sky in terrifying precision, their ships gleaming with dark, alien technology. Their intent was clear: destroy everything. The remnants of humanity, the last hope of the human race, were marked for extinction. "Get to the ship. Move," Kane shouted, his voice filled with urgency as he ordered the crew to take positions. Their backs were against the wall, and they were severely outgunned. There were no reinforcements, no backup, just them, and their high-tech gear against an empire bent on their annihilation. The humans didn't have the numbers, nor did they have the firepower to go head-to-head with the Void Dominators, but they had something the aliens didn't: their determination. They weren't going to go down without a fight. Bonner, the battle-hardened soldier, surveyed the battlefield, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the advancing enemy forces. The Void Dominators were methodical, their attack relentless. Their soldiers moved with precision, their weapons designed to obliterate any resistance. "We need to buy time," Bonner said, turning to Kane. "I'll hold them off. You get the crew to the Erebus. Don't argue, Captain. This is my fight." Kane shook his head, but he knew there was no other way. "We need you, Bonner. You're not doing this alone." Bonner smiled grimly. "We all have to do our part, Captain." With that, Bonner began organizing the crew's defense. They set up barricades using the wreckage of the colony, camouflaging themselves with makeshift cloaking devices that Zara had activated on the ship. The humans weren't just going to fight. They were going to use every trick they had learned to survive. Kane, Voss, and the rest of the crew took positions as Bonner prepared to make his stand. The cloaking devices made them nearly invisible to the Void Dominator sensors, but it wouldn't be enough for long. The aliens were too powerful, too advanced. Every time the humans fired their weapons, they saw the sheer force of the enemy's retaliation. Energy beams lashed out, tearing apart the surroundings. But the humans fought back with everything they had. A-driven drones, salvaged from the Erebus, buzzed overhead, distracting the alien forces and making rapid strikes against their advancing troops. The humans used guerrilla tactics to harry the enemy, making them second-guess their every move. Every shot counted, and every moment was a struggle to hold back the inevitable. Kane's hands trembled as he fired at the approaching Void Dominators. The air was thick with energy blasts, each one a reminder of the overwhelming power of the enemy they were facing. Yet in the midst of all this, Kane couldn't shake the weight of the situation. This was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight to preserve the legacy of humanity. Through the chaos, Bonner's voice rang out, giving orders, coordinating attacks, and taking down enemy after enemy. But the Void Dominators had far more advanced technology than the humans. Their weapons were designed to decimate anything in their path. Bonner's squad was holding the line, but for how long? Then, without warning, Bonner's voice crackled through the comm system. "Captain, we can't hold them off for much longer. Get to the ship." Kane's heart sank. The plan was clear. While Bonner held off the enemy, the rest of the crew would retreat to the Erebus and escape. But the battle wasn't over yet. As the crew began their retreat, Bonner's squad fought tooth and nail to buy them time. The humans made their way back to the ship, their hearts heavy with each step. They could hear Bonner's voice, rallying the troops, encouraging them to push forward. But the sound of weapons fire and explosions grew louder. Bonner's fate was sealed. He was going to make sure they survived, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Kane's chest tightened as they reached the Erebus. His heart ached for the soldier who had given his all. As the crew boarded the ship, the sound of Bonner's last stand echoed in their ears. They knew that they wouldn't be able to escape the Void Dominators forever. Once aboard the Erebus, the crew quickly sealed the doors, and the ship lifted off the moon's surface. They were shaken, battered, but alive. Bonner's sacrifice had bought them precious minutes to escape, and they needed to make the most of it. Kane sat in the captain's chair, his mind racing. The crew was quiet, each one lost in their thoughts, remembering the man who had given his life for theirs. The tension was thick, but there was no time to mourn. They had to move. They had to survive. Just then, Zara's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, the Void Dominators have initiated a planetary strike. They are targeting Earth's original location." Kane's blood ran cold. The Void Dominators were going to finish what they started. The threat wasn't just the colony. They were going after humanity's last hope. And they weren't going to stop until every last trace of human existence was erased. "We can't let that happen," Kane muttered, slamming his fist onto the control panel. "We need to stop them." Dr. Voss turned to him, her face pale. "How?" "We're outgunned, Captain. The Void Dominators have overwhelming firepower." "We'll find a way," Kane replied, his voice firm. "We have to. For Bonner. For all of humanity." The crew began to regroup, their minds now focused on the new mission. Stopping the Void Dominators before they could wipe out humanity's last remnants. The battle was far from over. The stakes were higher than ever, and their survival was no longer guaranteed. As the Erebus sped toward the distant location of the planetary strike, Kane looked out at the stars. The weight of the universe seemed to press down on him, but he knew one thing for sure: they would fight. They would fight with everything they had. And they would not go down without a final stand. The fate of humanity was in their hands, and it was time to make their move. The cold hum of the Erebus filled the empty void of space as the crew prepared for what could be their final mission. They had survived against impossible odds, but their battle was far from over. The Void Dominators had to be stopped, not just for their own survival, but for humanity's future. Captain Kane stood in front of the crew, his resolve hardening as the weight of the mission settled on his shoulders. "We're about to make our final move," Kane said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "This is our chance to strike back, to show the Void Dominators that they can't wipe out humanity without facing the consequences. We infiltrate their capital ship, destroy their leadership, and cripple their empire. We do this for Earth, for Bonner, and for everyone we've lost." The crew nodded in silence, their faces grim but determined. They all understood what was at stake. Dr. Lyra Voss, the brilliant scientist who had been vital in keeping the Erebus functional, stepped forward. "I've developed a way to hack into the Void Dominator eye," she said, her voice calm despite the danger. "If I can access their mainframe, I can destroy their leadership, cut the head off the servant. But there's a risk. The process will take time, and it may cost me my life." Kane's heart tightened at her words. "We can't afford to lose you, Lyra, but if this works, it could change everything." Lyra's gaze softened, and she gave him a small, almost sad smile. "We're all willing to sacrifice everything for this mission. Don't worry about me, Kane. Just make sure you get us out of there alive." Kane nodded, a silent promise to protect her at all costs. The crew wasn't just a team. They were family. And this family was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of their lives. The plan was simple but incredibly dangerous. They would infiltrate the Void Dominator capital ship, a massive, heavily fortified vessel located deep within their empire. The Erebus would get them as close as possible, and from there, they would have to board the capital ship, fight their way to the Central Command, and disable the AI systems that controlled the Void Dominator leadership. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they failed, humanity would face total annihilation. If they succeeded, they would have crippled the most powerful force in the galaxy. As the Erebus neared the capital ship, the tension among the crew was palpable. Kane stood at the helm, his fingers gripping the control panel as he monitored their progress. He could feel the weight of every second. The Void Dominators were known for their ruthless efficiency and cunning. If they suspected anything, the crew wouldn't stand a chance. "Ready the infiltration teams," Kane ordered. "This is it. No turning back now." Lyra, along with the rest of the crew, suited up for the mission. Their uniforms were equipped with the latest tech, including cloaking devices and advanced weaponry scavenged from the aliens they have fought in the past. The Erebus had become more than just a ship. It was their lifeline, their home. And now it was their last chance to strike back at the Void Dominators. As they approached the capital ship, the tension grew. Kane's mind raced through every possible scenario. What if they were discovered before they could infiltrate? What if the Void Dominators had already set a trap? The stakes were too high to risk failure. But there was no time for doubt. They had a mission, and they would carry it out. The Erebus entered the capital ship's gravitational pull, and the crew boarded their shuttlecraft. The silence inside the shuttle was deafening. No one spoke, but the weight of their thoughts hung heavily in the air. They landed on the outer hull of the capital ship, hidden in the shadows. The cloaking devices activated, rendering them nearly invisible to the Void Dominator sensors. Every move they made had to be calculated and precise. One slip-up could mean the end for them all. They made their way through the dark, metallic corridors of the alien ship, their footsteps muffled by the thick plating beneath them. The tension was unbearable, every corner hiding the threat of discovery. But the crew pushed forward, their training and determination guiding them through the heart of the enemy's territory. The first obstacle came quickly. A group of Void Dominator soldiers patrolled the area ahead. Without a word, Kane motioned for the team to take position. The crew moved silently, swiftly incapacitating the guards without making a sound. Their experience in covert operations had prepared them for this moment. But just as they thought they had cleared the path, a faint click echoed through the corridor. A trap. The Void Dominators had known they were coming. A blaring alarm suddenly rang through the ship, signaling the breach. "Move! Now!" Kane barked. "We've been compromised." The crew sprinted through the halls, the sound of pursuing soldiers growing louder with each passing second. Blaster fire streaked past them, narrowly missing as they dodged and weaved through the alien ship. The stakes had just risen. Now, it was a race against time. Kane's heart raced as they pushed deeper into the ship, the pressure mounting with every step. They were so close. The command center was just ahead. But the Void Dominators weren't going to let them reach it without a fight. They encountered wave after wave of soldiers, each one more ruthless than the last. But the humans fought back with everything they had. The crew used their advanced technology to gain the upper hand, deploying drones, cloaking devices, and energy shields to counter the Void Dominator's superior firepower. As they neared the central command room, the situation grew even more dire. The Void Dominators had already anticipated their plan. They'd set up barricades, reinforcements, and automated defenses to stop the crew from reaching the mainframe. "We're almost there," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with determination. "Just a little longer, and I'll have access to their systems." Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the door ahead. They were on the cusp of success, but there was no time to celebrate. Every second they spent here brought them closer to death. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the corridor. The door to the command center opened, revealing a sea of Void Dominator soldiers. The crew was surrounded. This is it, Kane thought. There was no turning back now. He raised his weapon, his voice cold with resolve. "We fight for humanity. We fight to the end." The final showdown had begun. The crew of the Erebus was about to face the most intense battle of their lives, and the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The cold expanse of space was alive with the chaos of war. The Void Dominators had unleashed their full force, determined to crush humanity's last hope once and for all. Their fleet was massive, unfathomably large, and the odds were overwhelmingly against the crew of the Erebus. Yet even as the Void Dominators pressed forward with their brutal might, the humans stood firm, unwilling to let Earth's legacy die without a fight. The final battle had begun. Kane's pulse pounded in his ears as the Erebus surged into the heart of the enemy fleet. The battle raged around them, explosions lighting up the black void of space like stars gone supernova. The soundless violence of orbital bombardments tore apart enemy ships, their massive hulls breaking apart in the harsh vacuum. Waves of alien ships swooped down, firing their advanced weapons in relentless barrages, while smaller, faster fighters darted in and out, launching assault after assault. The crew was on high alert, working as one to navigate the chaos. Inside the Erebus, the bridge was a flurry of activity. Sirens blared as the ship shook with the impact of blasts from enemy fire. But the crew held their ground, working tirelessly to ensure their ship stayed operational in the face of the onslaught. Despite their inferior numbers, the humans found ways to fight back. They relied on their knowledge of their own technology, using the advanced equipment they had scavenged over the years, and their resourcefulness to gain the upper hand. Kane's mind worked quickly, calculating every move, every tactic with precision. In the midst of the battle, Kane's thoughts briefly flashed to the past. He thought of the Earth they had lost, of the family he'd never see again, of the friends and comrades who had perished in the earlier fights. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Kane refused to let despair take hold. This was humanity's last stand, and he would do whatever it took to honor the memory of those they'd lost. As the Erebus swerved to avoid enemy fire, a large Void Dominator ship moved into position, its cannons aimed directly at the heart of humanity's remaining fleet. It was their flagship, the largest and most formidable vessel the Void Dominators possessed. Kane's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. This ship had to be destroyed, or humanity's fight would be over. "Get us close to that flagship," Kane commanded, his voice filled with resolve. "We take it out now, or we don't make it out at all." The Erebus tore through the battlefield, weaving between explosions and enemy ships. It was a suicidal maneuver, but it was the only chance they had. The crew of the Erebus fought tooth and nail, using every weapon at their disposal to tear through the Void Dominator forces. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but they were human, and that meant they had the ingenuity to survive where others would falter. The enemy flagship loomed ahead, its dark hull stretching out like a predatory beast, ready to swallow them whole. But the humans had a secret weapon. Using their cloaking technology, they managed to approach the flagship without detection. Just as the Void Dominator fleet began to regroup, the crew of the Erebus launched a surprise assault. Blaster fire erupted as the ship's hull exploded from within. The humans had set off a chain reaction in the flagship's critical systems, creating chaos on board. The battle inside the ship intensified as Kane and his team fought their way through, engaging in close-quarters combat with the Void Dominator soldiers. Their advanced weapons were no match for the humans' bravery and determination, and one by one, they fell before the crew of the Erebus. But as the humans gained ground, the Void Dominators retaliated with their last-ditch effort. An overwhelming force of reinforcements flooded the corridors of the flagship. The crew fought on, but they were growing tired, each passing moment more desperate than the last. It was at this moment that Lyra, the brilliant scientist who had been a constant source of hope for the crew, stepped forward. Her eyes met Kane's, her expression somber yet resolute. "I've accessed the mainframe," she said. "I'm uploading the virus that will destroy their AI network and wipe out their leadership. But there's a catch. The process is risky, and I may not survive." Kane's heart tightened. "Lyra, no." But she cut him off. "There's no other way. This virus is our best shot. If I don't do this, humanity is doomed." With no time to argue, Kane nodded, his face filled with a mixture of fear and pride. He knew the risks, but he also knew that without Lyra, they would never have gotten this far. She was their last hope, and she was about to make the ultimate sacrifice. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as Lyra worked, her fingers flying over the controls. The room shook violently as another barrage from the Void Dominators hit the ship, but Lyra never faltered. She was determined to finish what she had started. Kane watched as Lyra's face grew pale, the strain of the task beginning to take its toll. The virus was nearly uploaded, but the Void Dominators weren't going to let her finish. They sent wave after wave of soldiers to stop her. The battle intensified, and the crew fought valiantly to protect Lyra as she completed her mission. Finally, with a final keystroke, the virus was uploaded. Lyra collapsed, her energy spent, but the damage was done. The Void Dominator eye began to malfunction, their fleet's leadership crumbling under the weight of the virus. The remaining Void Dominator ships fell into disarray, and chaos spread throughout their ranks. The crew of the Erebus fought on with renewed strength, knowing that the battle was nearing its end. The Void Dominator fleet was in disarray, and one by one, their ships began to fall. The Erebus continued its assault on the flagship, its weapons tearing through the remaining defenses. With a final explosion, the Void Dominator flagship exploded in a blinding flash of light, its massive hull breaking apart as the battle came to a close. The remaining Void Dominator ships scattered, their forces decimated. As the crew of the Erebus stood over the wreckage of the enemy fleet, Kane looked out at the stars, the weight of the victory settling on his shoulders. They had won, but the cost had been high. Lyra was gone, and many of their comrades had fallen along the way. "We may have lost Earth," Kane said quietly, his voice tinged with grief, "but we have not lost humanity. We will rise again." And in that moment, as the echoes of the final battle faded, the crew of the Erebus knew that they had done what seemed impossible. They had defeated the Void Dominators and ensured the survival of humanity. The road ahead would be difficult, but as long as they remembered the sacrifices of those who had fallen, they would rebuild, stronger than ever before. The stars above glimmered, silent witnesses to the triumph of humanity's will to survive. The fight was over, but the journey was just beginning.